I should have seen it coming, but in the rush of my younger days I was blinded by hope and the promise of a new beginning. I remember the first time I met Marissa. I was in my late 20s, full of ambition and blind optimism, and there was an unmistakable sadness behind her smile. She carried herself with a quiet strength, a resilience that drew me in despite the undercurrent of vulnerability I sensed from the start. I soon learned she was a single mother, raising little Sophie, a bright-eyed 5-year-old who filled our home with laughter and endless energy. In that moment, as I held her tiny hand and listened to her chatter about her day, I knew I was falling in love, not only with Marissa, but with the little girl who had already begun calling me Dad. In those early days, every moment felt sacred and irreplaceable. I took pride in every small gesture, tucking Sophie in at night, patiently helping her with school projects, and even teaching her how to ride her little bike in the park on sunny afternoons. Every laugh, every tear wiped away, every comforting word shared was a brick laid in what I believed was the strong foundation of our unconventional family. I thought I had built something enduring and unshakable, much like the steady, reliable construction of a home meant to stand the test of time. But as the years passed, subtle hints began to emerge like tiny fissures in an otherwise solid structure. I recall a moment when I caught a fleeting look of doubt in Marissa's eyes, a shadow that passed quickly, leaving me to question if my presence was as secure as I believed. I listened to the soft murmurs of worry from my closest friend, Tom Reynolds, whose cautious advice I initially ignored. His words echoed in my mind whenever I caught a glimpse of uncertainty in Marissa's tone or a hesitation in her smile. Helen, Tom's wife, often warned me gently that not all was as it seemed, that love and loyalty sometimes came with hidden costs. Yet, in my heart, I chose to dismiss those warnings as the overthinking of someone who did not understand the depth of our bond. There were evenings when I sat quietly in the living room, the soft hum of the night wrapping around me as I stared at old photographs of Sophie's first birthday and the day she first learned to ride her bike. I marveled at how effortlessly I had become a father figure to a child who was not mine by blood, and I took comfort in the thought that I had given her the love and stability that had been missing from her early life. I convinced myself that every sacrifice was worth it because I was not only building a future for myself, but also mending the broken pieces of a past that had been scarred by promises unfulfilled. Now, as I look back, I realized the warning signs were there all along. Each small crack in the foundation of our family life was a reminder that things were not as they appeared. I had been so engrossed in the warmth of our shared moments that I ignored the subtle signs of instability, the fleeting glances, the half-spoken words, and the moments of silence that spoke volumes. I never imagined that the man I had vowed to be, who wiped away tears and mended scraped knees, would one day face the painful truth that love and loyalty do not always guarantee a permanent place in someone's heart. The realization hit me slowly, like water seeping through a wall, gradually eroding the structure I had believed to be unbreakable. I am left now with memories that both comfort and haunt me. I remember every shared secret, every whispered hope, and every promise made in the quiet hours of the night. But along with these cherished recollections, I also carry the burden of knowing that even the strongest foundations can crack, leaving behind the remnants of what once was and the painful understanding that sometimes, even love is not enough. I had always believed that family meant being present in every joy and sorrow. When Sophie got engaged, my heart leaped with pride and excitement. I pictured a bright future where we celebrated every milestone together. Yet soon, something began to change. In the weeks leading up to the engagement party, I noticed a growing distance, a feeling that I was being slowly edged out. At first, I tried to brush it off as mere overthinking, a product of my own anxious heart. But the signs grew stronger. Conversations in our living room often circled around a name I had not heard before, Julian. I remember the night Marissa mentioned it casually. Sitting with a cup of tea in our modest kitchen, she said with a light tone, "Julian has been a huge help with the planning." It was as if the word fell from her lips with no weight at all. Yet, to me, that word echoed like a verdict. Julian, the new man who had slipped into our lives without so much as a proper introduction. I tried to convince myself that he was simply assisting with details, that nothing more would come of it. But as days passed, I began to see more. Every planning meeting, every shared laugh about Sophie's future, felt like I was being excluded. I found myself sitting in the background while discussions revolved around this stranger who now held a place in our family that I had cherished for years. I watched the preparations for the engagement party with growing unease. I once thought that my role as Sophie's father was sacred, a role earned through countless bedtime stories, scraped knee bandages, and gentle words of comfort. I had been there for every moment, thinking that my love had carved out an unbreakable space in her life. But with every plan that omitted me, every decision that was made without my input, I felt that space shrinking. It was as if I was no longer the one who knew her dreams or her fears, but just an extra face at gatherings where laughter and hope used to ring true. On the day of the party, the feeling solidified. I walked through the door expecting a warm welcome, only to find that every conversation, every plan, every moment was shared by those who now seemed to belong to a different family. The air was thick with cheerful chatter about the future, yet I felt an icy distance between me and the celebration. I tried to speak up, to ask about plans and details I had once been so involved in, but my questions were met with polite smiles and a gentle change of topic. I stood there, a silent observer, as I realized that the new man, Julian, was not just a helper in the background. In every glance exchanged between Marissa and him, I saw the unmistakable signs of a connection that I no longer belonged to. In that moment, my mind raced with memories of all the years I had devoted to Sophie, the scraped knees I had mended, the countless stories read under soft lights, and the quiet nights spent talking about dreams. How could someone so dear to me allow a stranger to step into those memories? The realization stung like a bitter wind. I had been replaced in the most subtle yet devastating way. I felt as if I were an outsider at a table that was once reserved for me, a guest in my own daughter's life. I struggled with anger and sorrow in equal measure, questioning every moment that led to this painful exclusion. That night, as I left the party quietly without drawing attention, I carried with me the weight of a deep betrayal. The echoes of the evening haunted me as I drove away, the lights of the house fading into the darkness behind me. I knew then that the foundation I had built, the bonds I had nurtured, were now showing cracks I could no longer ignore. I felt lost, uncertain of how to reclaim the role I once held so dearly. And so, with every mile that separated me from that painful night, I wondered if the love I had so freely given would ever be enough to bring me back into the family I once knew. I realized now that the warnings were there all along, hidden in every small exclusion and every whispered mention of Julian. The future that I had imagined with Sophie and Marissa was changing before my eyes, leaving me to confront a reality I had never wanted to face. I always thought I had built a lasting bond with Sophie, a bond that time and circumstance could not break. I spent years nurturing her, guiding her, and ensuring that she never felt alone. Yet, as the seasons passed, an unspoken shift began to form, a subtle, painful displacement I could no longer ignore. I remember the day I first saw Julian standing beside Marissa, speaking with an ease that made my heart sink. His presence filled a void that I had once proudly occupied. I had given everything I had to be the father Sophie deserved, and now I watched helplessly as another man slowly assumed the role I once held so dear. The shock of witnessing Julian step into my place was overwhelming. I had spent countless nights imagining a future where Sophie would always turn to me for guidance, where my voice would calm her fears and celebrate her triumphs. Instead, his warm tone and gentle laugh resonated in spaces that were once filled solely with my care. Every conversation I shared with Marissa seemed to weave his opinions and ideas into the fabric of our family life. I began to feel like a shadow, a silent observer in a life that was no longer mine. I could no longer ignore the cold truth that I was gradually being replaced. Days melted into weeks as the reality of this change sank in further. I watched from the sidelines as Julian's laughter mingled with Sophie's giggles, a sound that once belonged only to me. I felt the chill of isolation creep into every corner of my being, accompanied by the bitter taste of betrayal. I had believed that love was an unbreakable bond, yet here I was, forced to witness my role as a father being usurped by someone who had once been a stranger. I questioned every decision, every sacrifice I had made in the hope that our family would grow stronger. The strong foundation I had so lovingly built was crumbling before my eyes, and I was powerless to stop it. I tried to speak to Marissa about the hurt that plagued me, hoping that she would understand the depth of my pain. But whenever I raised my concerns, her words were light and dismissive. "Julian is just helping out," she would say, as though that explanation could fill the growing void in my heart. Each time her voice fell on those words, it stung all the more, confirming that I no longer held the place I had fought so hard to secure. In quiet moments, I found myself reliving every memory we had shared, every bedtime story, every scraped knee that I had mended with gentle care, every secret smile that said, "I am here for you." Now, those treasured memories were dimmed by the painful reality of being replaced. Late at night, as I sat alone in the dark, I recalled the promises I had made to Sophie, promises that I believed were unbreakable. I wondered how a man who had once been an outsider could so easily infiltrate the life I had built with so much love and effort. With each passing day, the presence of Julian grew, and I felt more like a visitor in my own home than the devoted father I had always been. The ache of being edged out was relentless, a constant reminder that sometimes the ones we trust the most can leave us feeling empty and betrayed. I clung desperately to the hope that one day Sophie might see the sacrifices I had made, that she would remember the warmth of my embrace and the comfort of my words. I longed for a moment when she would realize that no one else could ever replace the bond we had forged through years of laughter, tears, and shared dreams. But as the days turned colder and the distance between us grew wider, that hope began to fade into a distant memory. The man who had taken my place was not just a fleeting presence. He was becoming an essential part of the life I once knew, leaving me stranded at the edge of a family I no longer belonged to. I stood in the silence of my heartbreak, struggling to come to terms with the painful truth that I had been replaced, and that nothing I did could restore what once was mine. I remember the day the envelope arrived as clearly as if it were yesterday. I had been sitting alone in the quiet of our living room, trying to make sense of the growing distance between me and the family I had given my all to. That morning, the postman handed me an envelope with neat handwriting that I assumed held the promise of another celebration, a moment when our family would come together again. Instead, as I carefully broke the seal and unfolded the letter, I found words that shattered my heart. The invitation was for Sophie's wedding, a day I had looked forward to with hope and pride, yet the words on that paper read in cold, unyielding ink that Sophie would be given away by Julian. I felt the room spin as the reality of my replacement hit me like a tidal wave. For years, I had been the steady presence in her life, the one who held her hand when she was scared and celebrated every small victory with genuine joy. I had sacrificed sleep, comfort, and even parts of my own happiness to build a bond that I believed would last a lifetime. That invitation, with its callous wording, declared that all of those years meant nothing. I had been cast aside without warning, my role reduced to that of an observer at a moment that was meant to be mine. In the days that followed, I tried to find solace in memories of the laughter we shared and the moments I thought defined our unbreakable connection. I replayed every detail of the times I comforted her, every instance I cheered her on, but each memory only deepened the wound. The invitation was a stark reminder that even the most carefully built foundations could be undermined by choices I had no control over. I wondered how Marissa could be so indifferent, how she could erase my place in her daughter's life so casually. I recalled the many nights I spent up late, listening to Sophie's dreams and fears, and wondered when the signs of my displacement had become so clear. I had once believed that love was enough to secure a place in someone's heart, but now I was forced to confront the painful truth that loyalty and sacrifice might not be rewarded. As I stared at the invitation, my hands trembling, I realized that everything had changed in an instant. The man I had trusted to share in the responsibilities of our family was now the one holding the reins of our future, and I was left wondering where I fit in. The day's light seemed to fade, and the shadows that crept across the room mirrored the growing darkness in my heart. I spent the rest of that day in silence, trying to hold on to a memory of what once was. A time when I was the one who had been counted on, the one who had been there for every scraped knee and every tear shed in the quiet hours. Instead, I felt like a relic of a past that no longer mattered. With each passing moment, the reality sank in deeper. I had been replaced not just in title, but in the very essence of who I was meant to be. I could no longer ignore the voice inside me that whispered of betrayal and loss, a voice that grew louder with every thought of that fateful invitation. I realized that no amount of denial could undo the hurt, and that the invitation was not merely a piece of paper. It was the final nail in the coffin of a bond one thought was eternal. The pain was both raw and real, a testament to the fact that even the strongest love can be shattered by the callous decisions of those we hold dear. I sat there for hours, grappling with a mix of anger and sorrow, unable to shake the feeling that I had been cast out from the life I had worked so hard to nurture. In that quiet moment, I understood that everything I had built was crumbling, and that the future would no longer include the love I had once known. I remember the day of the wedding clearly. It was a bright morning that carried both hope and a heavy, unspoken sorrow. I had prepared for this day for so long, picturing the moment I would proudly stand beside Sophie as she stepped into a new life. Yet from the very beginning, I sensed something was not right. The church, adorned with delicate white ribbons and soft floral arrangements, was filled with laughter and gentle music. But as I entered, a cold emptiness settled over me. I was not greeted with the warmth I once knew. Instead, I felt like an interloper in a celebration that was no longer mine. As the ceremony began, my eyes searched desperately for any sign that I still belonged in Sophie's world. I watched as Julian, with his assured smile and calm manner, escorted Sophie down the aisle. Every step she took seemed to push me further into the background. I had been the one to soothe her tears during storms, to cheer her on when she learned to ride her bike, and to celebrate every small victory. Now, with each graceful step, it felt as though the role I had cherished was being rewritten by another. My heart ached as I realized that the years of love and care I had given were being overshadowed by a man I barely knew. A man who now claimed a place in her life that I once held dear. Throughout the ceremony, I sat in silence, every detail of the day cutting deeper than the last. I listened to the soft strains of music that once evoked memories of bedtime stories and whispered dreams shared in the quiet of our home. Instead, they now underscored a painful transformation. The faces around me blurred into a sea of congratulatory smiles and whispered hopes for the future, while I remained frozen in a moment of betrayal. Each time I caught a glimpse of Sophie's joyful expression or the way her eyes sparkled when she looked at Julian, the sting of exclusion intensified. I felt invisible, as if I were a shadow lingering in the background of a life that had moved on without me. When the speeches began, the hall filled with voices praising the new beginning that Julian represented. His words, polished and confident, recounted memories of Sophie that should have been mine to treasure. I sat there, clenching my hands, feeling every syllable chip away at the foundation of the bond one thought we had built over years of shared moments. With every kind word he spoke, I felt my own history with Sophie being rewritten, a rewriting that left no space for the countless hours I had spent comforting her, teaching her, and loving her unconditionally. I tried, in a quiet, desperate hope, to catch Sophie's eye during the ceremony. For a brief moment, I believed she might see the truth of all our past joys and struggles. I longed for a look that said, "I remember everything, Dad." But her gaze was fixed ahead, her smile directed toward the future she now embraced with Julian. The realization that I had become an unwanted guest in my own daughter's life was like a weight too heavy to bear. As the final notes of the wedding song faded into silence, I felt a profound emptiness settle in my chest, a final confirmation that I was no longer a part of the family I had once known. I left the reception quietly, avoiding the chatter and congratulatory embraces that felt like reminders of what I had lost. Outside, the cool morning air did little to soothe the burning hurt inside. Each step I took away from the venue felt like a step away from the life I had dedicated myself to. I knew deep in my heart that the memories of laughter, love, and even the shared tears would now serve as bittersweet reminders of a chapter that had irrevocably ended. The wedding, meant to be a celebration of unity, had instead become the stage for my silent farewell. I walked away carrying the heavy burden of knowing that I had been replaced, that the love I had poured into every moment was now relegated to a distant memory, a memory that would forever echo in the silence of my absence. I had tried to ignore the ringing of my phone for weeks, but that day it seemed to ring with an urgency I could no longer deny. I sat alone in the dim light of the living room, feeling the familiar ache of loss and betrayal when the call finally came. I let it ring a few times, my heart pounding in my ears as memories of laughter and shared secrets with Sophie and Marissa clashed with the present void. Then, a voicemail came through, a message in a cheerful, casual voice that sounded almost too bright for the circumstances. It was Sophie. Her tone was light as she recounted the honeymoon plans, the resort, and even the expensive meals they had indulged in, as if nothing had changed between us. But then, beneath that easy laughter, a tremor of worry slipped in. "Dad, we went a little over budget. Could you help out? Just this once." Her words echoed in my mind like a cruel reminder. I closed my eyes and felt the weight of her request settle on my shoulders. They had pushed me away, erased my place in their lives, yet now they reached out only when money was needed. A bitter laugh escaped me as I exhaled slowly, a mixture of sorrow and resignation clouding my thoughts. "I'm sorry, Sophie. I can't help you," I said aloud, the words feeling colder than I intended. There was a long pause, a silence that throbbed with all the memories of the years we had shared, of every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every moment I believed I was the one who truly knew her heart. In that silence, I could almost hear the echo of all the times I had been there for her, the promises I had made to always stand by her side. Then came a nervous laugh, half pleading, half dismissive. "Come on, Dad. You've always helped me," she said, her voice cracking with an emotion I couldn't quite place, a mix of guilt, longing, and perhaps regret. I clenched my jaw, feeling a sharp pang of anger mingled with the sorrow that had grown over the years. I recalled the countless evenings spent mending wounds both visible and hidden, the endless support I had offered when everything in her world seemed to fall apart. "Yeah, I have," I replied bitterly, the admission tasting sour on my tongue. Her next words came softly, almost inaudibly. "Is this about the wedding?" In that instant, the memories of a day that had torn our family apart resurfaced, painful and undeniable. My voice, when I answered, was steady but laced with an edge I had long suppressed. "It's about respect, Sophie, and I finally learned to respect myself." The line went silent for a heartbeat too long, and then the call ended, leaving me alone with the darkness and the cold realization that nothing would ever be the same. In that quiet aftermath, I felt as though I were standing at the crossroads of what once was and what could never be again. Each word she had spoken, each hesitation, was a reminder of the life we had built and the life that had crumbled around me. I wondered if she even realized that every plea for help was a silent plea to replace memories of love with the harsh sting of betrayal. As I sat there, grappling with the raw pain of abandonment, I felt both a deep sense of loss and a strange relief. The call had forced me to confront the truth. I had been a father, a friend, and a pillar in her life, only to be cast aside when convenience and money came into play. And in that realization, I found a grim sort of clarity, a painful but necessary step toward reclaiming the dignity I had lost. I knew that moving forward, I would have to let go of the past, even if it meant accepting that some bridges, once burned, could never be rebuilt. I sat in the dim light of the late afternoon, the quiet of my study broken only by the steady hum of my thoughts. Marissa had called earlier that day, her voice sharp and edged with anger. I remembered her words clearly, every syllable slicing through the remnants of hope I had clung to for so long. "You think you can just disappear and leave everything to fall apart?" she had shouted, and I could almost see the fury in her eyes through the phone. Her tone was unyielding, filled with a bitterness that made my heart ache with a mix of regret and inevitability. In that moment, I knew that the truth I had been avoiding was finally demanding to be faced. The conversation left me unsettled, forcing me to reckon with a reality that had been creeping into our lives like slow poison. For years, I had dedicated myself entirely to Sophie, pouring every bit of love and care into every moment we shared. I believed my presence was an unshakable part of her world, a constant in a sea of change. Yet now, Marissa's fury made it clear that nothing was as it seemed. She blamed me for not being more present, for not fighting harder to hold on to what we once had. But deep inside, I knew the true culprit was the insidious truth that had grown with every passing day. Julian was no longer merely a helper or a friend. He had become something else entirely, a presence that was steadily erasing the memories of all I had built. As the day wore on, I found myself sitting by the window, watching the fading light cast long, sorrowful shadows across the worn wooden floor. My mind drifted back to the moments that had led us to this painful juncture. The casual smiles that hinted at hidden meanings, the quiet exchanges that I had dismissed as harmless banter. I recalled how Marissa's eyes would light up whenever she mentioned Julian's name, as if he embodied a new beginning, a promise of stability I was no longer able to provide. The hurt of that realization was almost too much to bear. Julian had not only filled a role in Sophie's life, he had become a symbol of everything that was slipping away from me. In these quiet moments of reflection, I questioned every decision I had made and every sacrifice I had endured in hopes of building a family that would stand strong against life's storms. Marissa's anger echoed relentlessly in my ears, a harsh reminder that our past was disintegrating. I remembered a heated argument from months before when she had accused me of being too stubborn, too fixed in my old ways. I tried to explain that love required time and gentle nurturing, that some things could not be forced. But her words had cut deep, leaving wounds that time might never heal. Now, confronted with the truth of Julian's growing influence, I realized that those old wounds were signs of a deeper fracture, a rift that no amount of love or care could mend. The bitter truth was clear. While I had given my all to Sophie, my efforts were now being overshadowed by a man who had stepped in with promises I simply could not match. In a rare moment of confrontation, the memories of our harshest words came flooding back. "You have no idea what it is like to be replaced," I had once told her, my voice trembling with anger and despair. She had shot back coldly. "You chose to let him in, to let him take what was yours." Those words haunted me as I tried to piece together the shattered fragments of a life that once felt so complete. I began to see that the truth about Julian was not a matter of simple rivalry or replacement. It was a symbol of change that had been inevitable from the start. He was a constant reminder that even the strongest bonds could be undermined by forces beyond our control. Now, as I sat alone with my thoughts, I felt the weight of betrayal press down on me. I realized that Marissa's fury was not merely an attack on me. It was a cry of despair over a life that had taken a turn I could never have predicted. The truth was painful and undeniable. Julian had become the man who filled the space I once occupied, a role I had never truly possessed from the beginning. In that solitary moment, I accepted the harsh reality that our family was no longer whole, not because of a single act of betrayal, but because of a gradual erosion of trust and love that had been allowed to take root. I pressed my hand against the cool window pane as if to hold on to a final sense of control. The anger, sorrow, and bitter taste of truth swirled together in a storm of emotion I could no longer ignore. Marissa's fury had unveiled the painful truth about Julian, and with it, the undeniable fact that I had become a relic in my own daughter's life. The echoes of our shared past whispered through the silence of the room, urging me to confront a future that was as uncertain as it was inevitable. With every passing moment, the distance between what once was and what now lay before me grew ever wider. In that final, solitary instant, I closed my eyes and accepted this final truth, feeling its weight as both a burden and a release. The days in brought a quiet acceptance of what could not be undone, and in that silent moment, I whispered goodbye to the life I once knew. I woke up one morning to a silence heavier than any noise I had ever known. The house felt empty, each room echoing with memories of laughter now faded into a distant past. I had once believed that our shared dreams would build a future full of hope and light. Now, however, those dreams lay in ruins, scattered like broken glass on a cold floor. It was as if the foundation on which I had built my life had finally given way, leaving nothing but a barren space filled with regret and longing. I remembered the slow unraveling of everything I had known. At first, small hints appeared, a word here, a glance there, that something was off. Marissa's warm smiles turned curt and distant, and the gentle reassurances I once clung to began to sound hollow. I had poured my heart and soul into our family, believing that every sacrifice was worth the joy of watching Sophie grow into the bright girl I had always seen in her. But the more I tried to hold on, the more I saw the truth. The fantasy I had built was crumbling beneath the weight of reality. Each day brought with it a reminder of what was lost. I wandered through the empty halls of our home, where every picture on the wall and every trinket on the shelf whispered memories of happier times. I recalled the evenings spent reading stories to Sophie, her eyes wide with wonder, and the quiet moments when I thought our love was unbreakable. Now, those memories stung like bitter reminders of a past that no longer existed. I felt betrayed by the very dreams that had once given my life meaning. The hope that had sustained me was now replaced by a cold awareness that nothing could ever be the same. In the dark hours of the night, I sat by the window and watched the moon cast long shadows over the worn floorboards. The silence was overwhelming, a stark contrast to the lively chatter and laughter that once filled these rooms. I found myself questioning every choice I had made and every promise that had seemed so sure. I had believed that love could conquer all, that loyalty and sacrifice would bind us together through thick and thin. Instead, I now faced the harsh truth. Sometimes the things we hold dearest crumble away, leaving us with nothing but shattered dreams and an aching emptiness. The fantasy of a perfect family life had slowly disintegrated, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the ruins of what once was. I tried to recall the moments of genuine connection, the times when I felt truly seen and valued by Marissa and Sophie. Yet, every recollection was now tainted by the realization that those moments were fleeting, fragile things that could vanish in an instant. The man I had once been, a devoted husband and caring father, had been reduced to a mere shadow of his former self, trapped in a life that no longer belonged to him. As I stood there, grappling with the overwhelming sorrow, I also felt a strange stirring deep within me, a quiet resolve that began to take shape amid the despair. Even as the fantasy crumbled around me, I recognized that in its destruction lay the potential for something new. I realized that clinging to a past that had lost its meaning would only keep me imprisoned in a cycle of regret and pain. I knew I had to find a way to rebuild, to reclaim the parts of me that had been lost in the rubble of broken promises. Slowly, I began to understand that the end of one dream marked the beginning of another. Though the pain was sharp and the memories bitter, I resolved to learn from the ruins. Each shattered piece of our former life held a lesson about love, about loss, and about the strength it takes to start over when everything seems lost. With hesitant steps, I moved away from the remnants of the life I once knew, carrying with me the determination to forge a new path, even if that path was uncertain and lonely at times. In the quiet aftermath of a dream turned to dust, I allowed myself to grieve for what was lost. I embraced the truth that sometimes, no matter how much we love, the future we imagine may never come to pass. And in that acceptance, I found a fragile hope, a belief that from the ruins of the fantasy, a new beginning might someday rise, even if I had to learn to live with the scars of yesterday. I remember the day Marissa came to my door as if it were burned into my mind. The overcast sky mirrored the heaviness in my heart, and every step I took toward the entrance felt laden with the weight of finality. I had sensed that this meeting was coming, yet nothing could have prepared me for the raw emotion that surged in that moment. Marissa stood there, her eyes swollen with tears and regret, her once bright smile now a faded memory of better times. As she hesitated on the threshold, the silence between us grew thick and painful, a silence filled with all the words we never had the strength to say. Without preamble, she softly said, "I miss you." Her voice trembled, carrying the sorrow of a past that we both knew could never be reclaimed. I could see in her eyes the reflection of all the moments we had shared, the laughter that once lit up our lives, the whispered dreams of a future that now lay in ruins, and the unspoken apologies that hung between us like fragile glass. In that quiet space, I asked her gently, "Do you miss me, or do you miss what I did for you?" The question, simple yet piercing, seemed to hover in the air as a reminder of all the sacrifices I had made, all the nights spent comforting her, and all the days I had given my heart without reserve. Her face crumpled further, and in a broken whisper she admitted, "I made a mistake." The words struck me like a cold wind, and I felt the ache of every betrayal and every lost opportunity to mend what had been broken. I recalled the times I had stayed awake long into the night, holding on to the hope that our family could be whole again, that the love we once nurtured could somehow heal the deep wounds. But as I looked at her now, I knew that the rift had grown too wide, and the finality of our parting was inevitable. We stood there in the fading light, a tableau of shattered dreams and lingering memories. "Can't we talk?" she pleaded, her hand reaching out as if to grasp at the remnants of the past. But every step I took toward her was met with the painful realization that the time for healing had long since passed. My voice, though soft, carried the sorrow and bitterness of years lost. "Talk about what? How you let someone else take my place. How you came back only when it was too late." The words fell heavily between us, echoing the truth that our bond had been eroded by time and choices that neither of us could undo. In that moment, the hurt was too immense to bear. I stepped back, distancing myself physically as I attempted to shield the fragments of my wounded pride. My eyes searched hers for any sign of the love that had once united us, but all I saw was regret and resignation. The memories of our happier days, the soft hum of shared laughter, the gentle reassurance in a tender embrace, now seemed like distant echoes from a life that no longer belonged to either of us. I could feel the finality in every beat of my heart as I turned away, each step away a painful farewell to the years I had devoted to a love that had withered with time. As I walked down the quiet street, the chill in the evening air mirrored the numbness that had settled inside me. I realized that the goodbye we had shared was not just for what was lost between us, but also for the man I had once been. I carried with me the scars of betrayal and the burden of memories that now felt more like chains than cherished tokens. Each footfall on the cracked pavement marked the end of an era, a final severance from the life I had clung to so desperately. In that ultimate moment of departure, I whispered a silent farewell to the hopes and dreams we had once built together. The door closed behind me with a soft, irrevocable click, and I knew that the life we had shared was now nothing more than a memory fading into the darkness. The final goodbye was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, a slow letting go of a love that had run its course. As I disappeared into the night, I accepted that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt, and that sometimes the only way to save oneself is to say goodbye and walk away for good. I woke up one crisp morning with a strange lightness that I had not felt in years. The heavy burden of loss and betrayal had slowly begun to lift, leaving behind an emptiness that was no longer painful but oddly freeing. I stepped out into the cool air, feeling every breath as a reminder that I was still alive, still capable of starting over. The life I had once known had crumbled into ruins, a place where I had been replaced, forgotten, and betrayed. Yet, in that desolation, I found the seeds of something new. I understood now that freedom was not the absence of pain, but the choice to let go of the past and embrace what lay ahead. For a long time, I had clung to memories of laughter, bedtime stories, and quiet nights spent mending scraped knees, believing that my role as Sophie's father was sacred and unassailable. But the harsh truth was that even the strongest bonds can shatter under the weight of time and unmet expectations. As I walked through the empty streets, I recalled the painful days of exclusion and the hurtful whispers that told me I was no longer needed. Yet with each step, I also recalled the quiet strength I had cultivated, the resilience born from heartbreak, the courage found in solitude, and the will to rebuild a life that was entirely my own. In the stillness of the morning, I made a silent vow to rediscover myself. I would no longer allow the ghosts of the past to dictate my future. I began by revisiting the simple pleasures I had long forgotten. The taste of a warm cup of coffee in the early hours, the gentle caress of the wind as it rustled through the trees, and the soft murmur of a city waking up to endless possibilities. Each small moment filled me with a sense of renewal. I realized that the freedom I craved was not about forgetting those I once loved, but about accepting that life's chapters are meant to end so that new ones can begin. The days that followed were filled with tentative steps toward a new life. I enrolled in a local art class, something I had always wanted to do but never found the time for, and discovered a talent for painting that revealed parts of my soul I had long kept hidden. With every brushstroke, I poured out the hurt and the hope that mingled in my heart. I began to see beauty in the chaos and strength in vulnerability. The simple act of creating something from nothing gave me a sense of purpose that I had not known in years. I found myself speaking less of the past and more of the future, of dreams that were mine to shape, independent of the hurt I once endured. Slowly, I forged new connections with people who understood that life is a series of endings and beginnings. I met others who had also felt the sting of loss and the liberation of letting go. Their stories, shared over quiet dinners and long walks in the park, resonated with me. I realized that the freedom I was beginning to embrace was contagious, a soft power that allowed us to heal together. The anger and sorrow that once defined my every thought gradually transformed into a quiet determination to build a life that celebrated growth, self-respect, and genuine connection. Even as I moved forward, the memories of my past remained etched in my heart, not as scars, but as lessons. I understood that being replaced in one chapter did not diminish the love I had given or the man I had become. I was no longer defined by my loss, but by my capacity to rise above it. I learned that forgiveness, especially for oneself, is the most liberating act of all. And so, with each new day, I took a step further away from the life that had once chained me to regret and closer to the freedom I never knew I deserved. I now see that the end of one story does not mean the end of everything. It is simply a pause before the next journey begins. In embracing the unknown, I discovered a strength that was always there, waiting patiently beneath the layers of old pain. I chose to see the future not as an empty void, but as a canvas waiting for my own vibrant colors. And as I stand here today, with the sunrise illuminating my path, I know that true freedom comes from accepting the past, learning from it, and moving forward with hope in every step I take.